Today, our attention turns to Sanford, Florida, where jury selection for the trial of George Zimmerman has begun. The jury of 6 will come from a pool of 500 residents of Seminole County, and both the prosecution and the defense are allowed 6 disqualifications without having to justify the challenges to the judge. NBC's Kerry Sanders is following the trial for us. He's at the courthouse in Sanford. Kerry?
Well, good afternoon. The jury selection is going to be a very slow process, and we're seeing that right now. Inside the courtroom, the judge is talking to the potential jurors. There's a jury pool of 500. 100 of them arrived here at the courthouse this morning and were first given a videotape to explain what their civic duties are about being a member of a jury, and then they were asked to fill out a questionnaire. That questionnaire has now been taken into the courtroom, and we've moved to the next step of this, where both the prosecution and the defense get a chance to individually ask questions to the potential jurors. The goal here is to get 6 jurors and alternates. Now, there have been 2 jurors who have now answered a series of questions, but those questions have been limited in scope by what the judge has given them permission to ask. So they've spoken mostly and asked mostly about pretrial publicity and whether they watch television, what they know about the case, whether they've seen things that somehow stick in their minds that may somehow cause them to have preconceived notions about the case, and to also ask them about what sort of hardship that this would bring to them. Now, the names of the potential jurors has been, by the judge's order, concealed. It will not be revealed. But we've heard from at least 2 of the potential jurors today a little bit about who they are. The second juror to take the stand is a mother. She has 18 and 19-year-old son, as well as 3 other children, and I think she said some babies. She has a mother who lives with her. She and her husband recognize that it would be a hardship, but because her mother lives with her, were she to have to serve on this jury, she said, for a few days, that would be okay. Then the defense said, well, what if you had to serve on this for months? And then she responded, well, if that was her obligation, yes, she would have to do it. And then on further questioning, he said, well, would you do this or wouldn't you? And she said, yes, I would do it. So she recognizes the responsibility. She is a certified nursing assistant. She said she told her boss about the possibility of serving on a jury and said that, well, if it was for a couple days, that would be okay. So they're trying to drill down into the specifics about those issues. Now, in questioning of one of the jurors, they asked a specific question. Could you find George Zimmerman not guilty of killing a kid? And that's when the judge cut off the questioning by the defense attorney here of the potential juror and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get past these initial broader questions about pretrial publicity and hardship until we've reached 21 potential jurors. We'll put them in the jury box, and then we will ask them more specific questions. So that brings us to where we are in the courtroom right now.
Okay, got it. Thanks so much, Kerry, for your time. So what will each side be looking for during jury selection? Let's bring in our legal team, criminal defense attorney Jamie Floyd and Richard Gabriel, president of the American Society of Trial Consultants, as well as decision analyst. So Jamie, let's start with you. We know that Sanford, Florida has a checkered past dealing with racial tension starting back from Jackie Robinson days. We know both sides will probably be a little concerned about that, as well as the stand your ground law and the challenges that's created on both sides. What other red flags can you think of that may be a problem during the voir dire process?
Well, this is a case in which I believe that jury selection is key. Most cases, jury selection can be the key moment in the trial, but when you have a high publicity case and one in which race is a major, if not the major factor, jury selection can win or lose the case for either side. You're not allowed, however, at least as a constitutional matter, to consider race, at least out in the open, when selecting your jury. Although I do believe both sides will be thinking about race when they look at these jurors. Other things they'll be thinking about: age of the jurors. I think the defense would prefer older, more establishment jurors, folks who are a little more authoritarian, authority-minded, and the prosecution would prefer younger people. And I also think people who have children would be preferred by those by the prosecution, and people who don't have children by the defense. So obviously that is a factor. And then there's the issue of pretrial publicity. can they find a fair jury? Can they find people? This doesn't mean an ignorant jury, people who've heard nothing about this case. That would be a frightening group of people indeed. But people who can set aside their biases on both sides of the trial and be fair and apply justice.
Richard, let me get you to weigh in on that. What in your mind, from the defense and the prosecution's point of view, would make the perfect juror?
Well, as I'm sure Jamie knows, and as we all do when we practice, we're really deselecting a juror. We're really trying to knock away all those jurors who either have a bias on one side or the other, have formed opinions about the case. So what you're trying to do is really trying to sort of deconstruct and find that neutral or favorable jury. I think the prosecution in this case is looking for a couple of things. One is, along the racial lines, is someone who's been profiled, someone who knows what it's been like to have been labeled, targeted, and falsely accused. That's, I think, what the prosecution is looking for. I think they're looking for what I would call a presumed guilty juror. There are a lot of jurors who think if you wouldn't be sitting there if you hadn't done something wrong. And I think the parenting issue, prosecutors want somebody who can relate to somebody who's lost a child and just think somebody's responsible. On the defense side, it's a little counterintuitive. I think gun ownership is going to be a very interesting dynamic. Someone who's going to want to say, look, you have the right to defend yourself. A law and order juror, who typically the prosecution looks for, might be better in this case because, let's face it, George Zimmerman is the block captain and is protecting homeowners in there. And lastly, the defense is looking for a lone wolf or somebody who's going to basically split this jury because, let's face it, sometimes all they want is a hung jury.
But remember, the minute one side sniffs out that the other side is getting what it wants, they strike that juror if they can.
No, that's right. That's right. Richard, a couple weeks ago, George Zimmerman's attorneys tried to introduce some evidence about Trayvon Martin's past to try to make him look like a bad kid. That evidence was denied, but of course that generated a lot of ink, a lot of news coverage about that, and reporters telling us what that evidence was, potentially to taint the jury. That's the way the game is played, isn't it?
Well, it is these days. I mean, this is one of the natures of these high-profile trials. The Constitution presumes an impartial jury, and we have this kind of funny artificial system where these jurors have heard months and months, if not years, of stuff about the case, and then they're coming there, and the judge says, well, can you set that all aside? And the juror shrugs and goes, sure, I can. What is difficult, and I think what they're doing now with the jurors, is really finding out how much they've heard, what their opinions are, how deeply seated those opinions are, because let's face it, this is playing out as sort of the PR and propaganda war. From Zimmerman's side, they've been doing this from the very beginning. They've been releasing a lot of very affirmative defenses in the media.
There was a funny moment, though, in the courtroom just about 10 or 15 minutes ago where Mark O'Mara asked one of the potential jurors, what is your source of news? And he said, news? None. Now, I don't know that that's the kind of juror either side wants either. Someone who is paying absolutely no attention to current events or news. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
But that's an interesting point as well.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Richard. And up next, a vote in